Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Charles here. Charles, you're the CEO of Camelon, which is a really interesting company because you're an investor and a manager. You buy up different companies, help people get involved early on when they're young into business, and you assist a lot of people. You've helped many young people with opportunities they may not have had elsewhere, and now you guys have invested, I think, like over $300 million in equity, and you've been innovative in this category. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Great. Well, Ben, thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor.
Awesome. So, just going back to the beginning, Charles, how did your interest in the world of business leadership, wanting to be in this space of investing and managing businesses, like how did that passion begin?
Well, it looks like an atypical meandering path into investing, but in my mind, it was a direct logical progression. I never intended to be in business, let alone finance or investing. Into my college years, I wanted to be a writer and a doctor like Carlos Williams. I had difficult freshman year. It didn't enjoy the sciences, wasn't doing well at them, even though I had enjoyed them and did well before. And then I found comparative religion and philosophy, and that was my passion, right? And I launched a magazine as an undergraduate, and I fell in love with the publishing industry. And so the rest of my career out of school was trying to learn how to launch this magazine for real. It was a magazine about religion. And so I was at a place called Verona Suler. I was one of the few places that invested in magazines back in the day. And I'd learned enough by then that when this little thing called the internet happened, I realized it was going to be really tough even tougher than usual to launch a magazine. So I stayed in private equity, and I'd never lost the entrepreneurial bug, and I eventually launched Camelon in 2005. So the through lines, I was always driven to create and to contribute, and working with young people and teaching them about servant leadership and, how to make an impact beyond the so-called bottom line or returns to investors has always been central to what I've wanted to do. And what we do at Camelon allows for that.
So what specifically, Charles, inspired you to start Camelot? Like, what was there some experience? Like, what led to the creation of the company?
Yeah. So as I said, I had this entrepreneurial bug. I wanted to create, and I had noticed I had been doing buy and builds with small units, right? So we would put together smaller units to create a bigger unit, and I started to get fascinated with small companies, and I started to research them, and I realized that there was this massive opportunity out there in the market space, which we call large local businesses. And see, those are the businesses that searchers tend to buy, and just think 1 to 4 million of cash flow at the very, very low end of the so-called lower middle market, at the very high end of the small business market. And I had also, around the same time, in the mid 90s, a fellow named Ken Dykewald, I think he was one of the first to begin to promote the age wave. I think he published a book called The Age Wave and the so-called silver tsunami. And the combination of aging baby boomers who owned large local businesses, I realized it was a very large opportunity set. And nobody was focused on that except maybe the Riverside company was the only company that would do deals that small back then. So I started Camelon as an institutional searcher rather than a solo searcher, and got that off the ground in 2005 to focus exclusively on this large local space.
And so initially, like, were you thinking of, hey, let me also help some of these younger people get involved in buying these baby boomer businesses? Like, how did that piece come about?
Yeah, well, at the time, in the early 2000s, search had been around for 20 years, but there weren't that many searchers. You might have 10 a year. And I saw an opportunity to do something at larger scale. And so we didn't want to buy just one company. We wanted to buy acquire and run multiple companies. And so that's so we trained lots of young people within Camelon to search for businesses, kind of like the way I had learned at Summit. But it became much more comprehensive because we were buying control as opposed to minority positions. And but as search has grown over the years, it now makes more sense for us to, rather than buy the businesses and run them ourselves, to back younger folks to acquire a business and then become the CEO of that business, which is the essence of search, right? I might, we'll get into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting how, it did evolve over time. But you had, just going back a little bit, you had a background, got an MBA from Harvard Business School. How important would you say that educational aspect there was to what you're doing now? Like, do you see those skills being really translated into your business daily?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the kind of person you are. I happen to be somebody who benefits greatly from, a more of an academic setting to learn things. But that's not necessarily true for everybody. A lot of people, they learn much better outside of academic settings. So for me, once I realized I needed to understand, I was very naive, as I said. I was, going out trying to raise money for this magazine, and people were like, what do you know about business? And I was like, I don't know anything really about business. So I, at Summit Partners, I learned, and I decided I would benefit from the academic learning. It was just clear there was all this stuff I needed to know. And so that was very helpful for me. And then plus the network of individuals that you meet when you go to these business schools is also very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. So, so you were mentioning about search funds. What makes search funds so unique, and why are they so ideal for you to be involved in?
Yeah, so search, or what now is referred to in the literature as ETA, or entrepreneurship through acquisition. It's been around for about 40 years. It was invented back in the early 80s, I think, by a professor Grausbeck. I think he was at Harvard at the time when he did the first one, but he quickly moved from there to Stanford, and he popularized it at Stanford. And so it's has been historically associated with Stanford. The basic idea is there are lots of MBA candidates who want to be entrepreneurs and they want to run their own business, but they don't have, an idea for the next great mousetrap, right? And so this structure was put into place, and it's evolved and been refined over, 2, 3 decades to enable a recent graduate of an MBA program to search for 2 years for a business. And if they find that business, acquire it and become the CEO of the business, right? And so that's the basic essence of search. There's a lot of detail to it, but that's sort of how it works. And as investors in this space, we have the right to invest along the way, right? Not the obligation, but the right to invest. Mm-hmm. So it's a perfect match. When you asked about, okay, well, why is that ideal in terms of our interest in working with young people? That search itself has been the best performing equity asset class of the last 3 decades.
Really?
So it beats the top quartile performance of relevant private equity benchmarks by about 400 basis points. So it's been very successful, but very few people know about it because it's very, very small, but it's growing exponentially now.
Mm-hmm. And you're accompanying these young people along the way, like you're giving them advice and things like that. So it's not like, because they don't have the track record. Exactly.
So, when you hear it, sometimes it sounds insane, right? What? Somebody who's never run anything and managed anyone, and has had few years of work experience is going to take over a business. And the answer is that is quite a leap, unless it's within the structure of the way this community has evolved over time. And so the mentoring and the coaching that is provided by the investors in this community is extremely important, and it's very central. And having the capacity to coach and mentor young people is a critical, and you have to like it, you have to enjoy it, right? Is a critical aspect to making this thing all work. So yes, you're exactly right, Ben.
And Charles, what have you seen from like an investment standpoint has really worked best with bringing in somebody that's young, taking over a baby boomer business? Like what kind of has worked well? What have you seen in the right identifying these types of people, the young people, the best skills for someone to back?
Yeah, it's there, we have our kind of list of criteria that we kind of track and collect data on. Other people have theirs, but as you would imagine, it's relatively difficult to know when you meet a young searcher that they're going to be successful. First, they have to find a good business, and then they have to be a good CEO, right? And that's a long journey. It's probably a 6 to 10 year journey, something like that, right? And but one of the reasons this works is there are about 400,000 of these large local businesses owned by boomers and folks that are older than boomers, and they're turning 70 at the rate of more than 100 a day. And so they got to do something with their businesses, and they generally don't like to sell to competitors or to private equity firms because their business. I've been doing nothing but this for 20 plus years, and it's very evident that the majority, their business is more than just an asset. They have relationships with long-standing employees, and they worry about what's going to happen to them. And so when they find a younger version of themselves, and that chemistry works, it's an ideal situation. And they'll be willing to sell at lower prices, actually, to get the deal done with a searcher, as opposed to, say, a private equity firm.
Just because they're more willing to, they want somebody to really take over this, and they could build it long term. Like they trust that and they like that.
That's right. They're concerned about their legacy and how their people will be treated. We call it large local because even though the business is relative, what we all think of businesses as small, they're large in their local community, whatever that is. Sorry. And so if they were to sell their business, they'd make a lot of money when they sell their business, and then all of their employees or their key employees get laid off. That's something that's very uncomfortable in their community, right? And so they want to avoid that kind of where they do well, and then all these people that have helped them for 30 years don't do so well.
Right. Yeah. It makes sense why that. Now I see it a bit better. So you guys have, I think, reached out to 75,000 plus of these businesses. You've talked with tens of thousands of business owners. I mean, you have so much insight to the space. What have you learned from these people about business, about management, about just operating companies that you've applied to how you operate your company today?
Well, wow, that's a big question, Ben. Lots of things is the short answer. This space is very unique because it's populated by owner managers, right? Typically, or their families. It's family owned, or the bottom line is you don't have a lot of professional management in these businesses. Okay, and so it's from that all of the unique traits and difficulties and challenges and obstacles and whatnot. That's one of the sources of all of that, right? So there's hundreds of thousands of these businesses. Very few institutional investors work with them because it's a pain, right? All the smart guys think, let's do bigger and bigger deals, right? It's about the same amount of work. I'll make a lot more money if I do a bigger deal than a small deal, right? And so there are lots of little challenges here. And so what you learn when you talk to all of them for so long is you learn how to make all that work, how to overcome the various nuances and challenges that occur. So if you're buying a business with 50 million of EBITDA, there won't be any emotional issues, typically speaking, with children or the owner feels like he's letting go of his fourth child. So we've had these types of nuances that occur, and you've got to be ready for that. If you're not ready for that, it kind of can become a nightmare for somebody who isn't.
And you've done now 70 plus of these acquisitions, so I'm sure you.
Well, over our careers, we have, but yeah, dozens in, sort of the Camelon's late, current evolutions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And has there been changes, Charles, and specifically what you were looking for in the beginning to what you're looking for currently?
Not particularly. It's been relatively, consistent. You're looking for businesses that have recurring revenues. I mean, it's the standard stuff that you would imagine, but you prioritize things a little bit differently. And the application of technology to sort of businesses that really haven't had it, that's probably the biggest evolution over the last 20, 30 years. Is there's opportunity in that, and searchers are digital natives and they think in terms of apps and tools and stuff like that, and somebody who's 70 years old probably hasn't kept up with the latest stuff. And so there's an opportunity to apply that in almost any of the businesses that a searcher would acquire.
And that's a pretty large opportunity, you're saying?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because, let's say this very often is the case that the owner is the primary salesperson of a $2 million cash flowing business, right? And they really don't have a sales force, and they really don't have, a CRM system. And so if you want to, searchers will often, that'll be an easy lever to pull. They want to bring in some formal sales training. Owners like that tend to, grow to this point where they're comfortable. In other words, they never thought they were going to be this wealthy. They never thought they were going to be running a business. They've been making more money than they ever dreamed. Why risk it? Why try to grow it? Why? And so you're looking for these gems that, with a little energy and a little vision and a little, operational innovation, they can take off, and they do. I mean, search is its own asset class. It has it sits between venture and I think the rest of private equity from a risk reward standpoint, very few, lose 100% of your money. And a large portion make 5 times or more of your money. So it's an interesting set.
Are there any unique stories you have, Charles, of you guys getting involved in a business that had a lot of revenue potential but wasn't maybe maximized? You guys completely took it to a different place, or just any interesting stories you've had throughout your time in search?
Yeah. Well, one. So two. Maybe two anecdotes. One that shows how large local business owners look at things differently. So one owner had been at it for 20 years, wanted to exit, didn't want anybody to know. So it was very unusual. We got through the entire diligence process without anybody finding out. I think his assistant started to suspect something towards the last month or so. And the way he wanted to do it was close the deal and then announce it to everybody. And so he brought his whole company together, introduced us, explained how important this was, and he trusted us, and he was putting this business in his hands, and we were going to take care of them. And he started crying because he said, "This was my 4th child, and it's now time for me to spend time with my 3 other children, right? So that gives you a little bit of flavor. That doesn't happen typically. CEOs that are selling business may be crying for other reasons, but but usually not because of the emotional attachment to their business. At the other end, we were able to buy essentially a product, a set of products and brands, and some manufacturing, and then we were able to build all the operation around it, and then that became sort of a hub for acquiring other types of related products and brands, and that was extremely successful. So we think that there's opportunity in this space to do these buy and builds in certain industries.
And do you have any like goals now, Charles, like short-term goals, long-term goals? Like where do you see what's your big picture vision at this point in your life and in general with this company?
Yeah, I think the mission that we're on here is, as we've gotten into this and we see search expanding right now, it's really the province of 6 to 8, maybe 10, depending on how you define this, business schools. So the sort of the top 6 or 10 business schools in the country. I mean, it really isn't anywhere else. But the interest in search is growing. I think over the last decade, it's about 15-fold, the number of searchers, and more capital is coming into the space. So this is growing, and and we've been, as we've looked at this, there's an increasing diversity of searchers, and we think why shouldn't this expand beyond where it is today or where it's been for 3 decades? And in doing that, we think it's one of the most effective ways to narrow the wealth gap in America, which is it's a social problem that I think is at the core of our national security and at the core of a democratic free market, society. And if it keeps growing, it will continue to create division and problems. And so we want to apply search to that gap. And when you think about it, the haves, within a 2-year period, it usually takes 18 months for a searcher to find a business. The haves can transfer their business assets and cash flow and wealth to the have-nots, and to the next generation, more importantly. And so we're really on a mission to see if we can do that at scale.
Well, Charles, that was all the questions that I had. I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I think your mission is super important. There's so many people that want to run businesses, that want to be in charge of their own, destiny in that sense, and entrepreneurial, but just don't get the chance because they don't have the financial means. And you really have a great solution here. I know you've already helped a lot of different people be, business leaders, and I'm sure you'll continue to do that and help others give off the businesses to the right individuals that they can trust and that can grow them for future generations in that local area. So thanks for doing this and wishing you much success.
Well, thank you, Ben. Really enjoyed talking with you.